Commander Vexai stood in the center of the communication room watching the massive screens that covered the walls. His blue skin looked pale under the bright lights, and his large eyes showed fear. The screens displayed something that made his heart race with terror. Thousands of dark shapes moved through space toward his home world of Kthra. The Drakari swarm was coming. "How long do we have?" Vexai asked his science advisor Lithana, who worked at a nearby control panel. Her fingers moved quickly over the glowing buttons as she checked the data again and again. 6 months, maybe less, she said without looking up. Her voice shook slightly. "Commander, our weapons cannot stop them. We have nothing that can fight this." Vexai closed his eyes and tried to think. His people, the Zilani, had lived in peace for over 1,000 years. They built beautiful cities, created amazing art, and healed the sick. They never needed weapons or armies. Their technology focused on making life better, not on taking it away. But the Drakari swarm did not care about art or healing. The swarm was made up of machines, robots that consumed entire worlds. It would land on planets and strip away everything. Useful, metal, minerals, organic matter, even the soil itself. When they finished, nothing remained but dead rock floating in space. "Show me the data on the worlds they already destroyed," Vexai said. Lithana pressed more buttons, and the screens changed. Image after image appeared, showing planets that the swarm had visited. Each one looked the same. Gray, lifeless spheres, with no trace that anything had ever lived there. 17 worlds in this sector, Lithana whispered. Billions of people, all gone. Vexai felt sick. He thought about his own world, about the crystal gardens that took centuries to grow. He thought about the children playing in the parks, about the artists creating new sculptures, about the healers learning new ways to cure disease. All of it would disappear if the swarm reached Kthra. What about our defenses? He asked, though. He already knew the answer. "Commander, we have orbital platforms designed to deflect asteroids. We have shields that protect our cities from storms. But military weapons?" Lithana shook her head. "We have none. We never needed them." Other Zilani worked at stations around the room. All of them looked frightened. Some were crying. They all knew what was coming, and they all knew there was nothing they could do to stop it. "Sir," said a young communications officer named Kthra, "the council is asking for an update. They want to know if we have found a solution." Vexai almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. A solution? What solution could there be? His people were gardeners, and artists, not warriors. They had never even imagined that they might need to fight for their lives. "Tell the council I will speak with them soon," he said. "First I need to think." But thinking did not help. No matter how hard he tried, Vexai could not find an answer. The swarm was too big, too powerful. His people had no weapons, no armies, no way to fight back. Well, they could only wait and die, unless someone helped them. The thought came to him suddenly. Other species lived in the galaxy. Some of them had armies and weapons. Maybe one of them would help the Zilani fight the swarm. "Lithana," he said, "activate the emergency beacon." She looked at him with surprise. "Commander, that beacon has not been used in 300 years. Most species do not even monitor that frequency anymore. Some will hear it," Vexai said. "It is our only chance." The emergency beacon was an old system, built by the first Zilani who explored space. It could send a message across the entire galaxy, reaching any species with the right equipment. The message would include their location and a plea for help. Lithana activated the beacon. A new screen appeared, showing a simple message form. "What should I say?" she asked. Vexai thought for a moment. What words could express their desperation? How could he make strangers care about people they had never met? "Send this," he said. "We are the Zilani of Kthra. We are dying. Machine swarm comes to destroy our world and kill our people. Have no weapons to fight them. Please, anyone who receives this message, help us. We have children who laugh and play. We have artists who create beauty, we have healers who save lives. We have love for each other and for life itself. Do not let us fade from the universe. Please help us." Lithana typed the message and sent it. Across the galaxy, the signal spread from star to star, reaching thousands of worlds. The Zilani could only wait and hope that someone would answer. Hours passed, and days. Few responses came back, but they were not helpful. The Corvin Republic sent sympathy, but said they were too far away to help. The Stellar Federation expressed regret, but claimed they did not have enough ships to fight the swarm. The Hegemony of Worlds did not even bother to reply. Most species ignored the message completely. Vexai began to lose hope. Maybe his people truly were alone. Maybe they would die without anyone even caring. Then, on the third day after sending the beacon, a new message arrived. Kthra called out from his station. "Commander, we have a response." "But sir, this one is different." "Different how?" Vexai asked. "The signal is strong, much stronger than the others. And the language is strange. It sounds crude compared to standard galactic speech." "Play it," Vexai ordered. The message was short and simple. A male voice spoke in basic galactic standard, but with an accent that none of the Zilani had heard before. "Message received. Help is coming. Hold your position. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the UES Vengeance." The room fell silent. Everyone stared at the communication screen. "US," Lithana whispered. "What does that mean?" Kthra was already searching the galactic database. His face went white as he read the results. "Commander," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "US stands for United Earth Ship." Vexai felt his blood turn cold. "Earth. Yes, sir. The humans are coming." Lithana dropped into her chair as if her legs could no longer support her. Around the room, other Zilani began to back away from their stations. Some covered their faces with their hands. Everyone in the galaxy knew about humans. They came from a world so dangerous that it was classified as a Class 12? Deathworld. Nothing that deadly should have been able to support life. Yet somehow humans had not only survived but thrived on their nightmare planet. The galactic database contained warnings about humans. They were described as aggressive pack hunters who never gave up once they decided to fight. They came from a world where everything tried to kill them, from the weather to the animals to the plants. This had made them into something that other species feared. Humans were known to be territorial, violent, and completely unable to recognize when they were beaten. They would fight impossible battles and somehow win. It would turn peaceful planets into fortresses. It would kill anything. That threatened them, and they considered almost everything a threat. Most species avoided human space entirely. Those who had contacted humans in the past told stories that sounded like nightmares. Humans did not negotiate or compromise. They conquered or destroyed with no middle ground. And now they were coming to Kthra. "What have we done?" "Itha," whispered Vexai, stared at the screen showing the human message. His people had asked for help, and help was coming. But would the cure be worse than the disease? Would the humans save the Zilani from the swarm, only to conquer them afterward? Thought about his options. The Drakari swarm would definitely kill every Zilani and destroy their world. The humans might do the same thing, or they might not. It was not much of a choice, but it was the only choice he had. "Send a reply," he ordered. "Tell them we will hold our position and wait for their arrival." As Kthra sent the message, Vexai wondered if he had just saved his people or doomed them to an even worse fate. In 6 months, he would find out. 6 days later, alarms began ringing throughout the Zilani command center. Vexai rushed to the main display as Lithana worked frantically at her controls. "Commander, ships are dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of our system," she announced. 12 vessels, moving in formation. The screen showed the approaching fleet. Even from a distance, the human ships looked different from anything the Zilani had ever seen. Where most galactic species built smooth, elegant vessels that flowed through space like art pieces. These ships looked like they were designed for one purpose only: war. The human ships were angular and brutal-looking, thick armor plating covered their hulls. Weapon systems jutted out from every surface. They moved through space like predators stalking prey, and their very appearance sent chills through everyone who saw them. "The lead ship is requesting permission to dock with our station," Kthra reported from his communication post. Shook as he spoke, Vexai took a deep breath. This was the moment that would decide his people's fate. "Grant permission," he said, "and prepare the main conference room." An hour later, Vex-High stood in the docking bay waiting for the humans to arrive. Lithana stood beside him, along with several other Zilani officials. All of them were nervous. Some were visibly shaking. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and the first human stepped through. Captain Jake Morrison was not what Vex-High had expected. He was shorter than most Zilani, but much broader and more muscular. His body looked like it was built for strength and endurance rather than grace. He wore what appeared to be armor, even though this was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. His hair was dark and his skin was tanned from exposure to harsh sunlight, but it was his eyes that made Vex-High nervous. They moved constantly, scanning the docking bay for threats that did not exist. Even here, in what should be a safe place, the human was ready for danger. Behind Morrison came 3 other humans. A woman with short red hair who wore the same style of armor, a man with dark skin and mechanical devices attached to his arms, a woman with blonde hair who moved like a predator, alert and ready to spring into action at any moment. Morrison stepped forward and nodded to Vex-High. "Commander Vex-High, I assume? I'm Captain Jake Morrison. This is Lieutenant Kelly Hayes, Engineer Danny Rodriguez, and Sergeant Lisa Park." Vexy noticed that Morrison's first action was not to greet them warmly or express sympathy for their situation. Instead, he immediately identified himself and his team members. It was efficient, practical, and somehow frightening in its directness. "Captain Morrison," Vexai replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thank you for coming. We are grateful for any help you can provide." Morrison looked around the docking bay, his eyes taking in every detail. "How long until the swarm arrives?" "For months, perhaps less," Vex-High answered. "That's cutting it. Close, but it should be enough time." Morrison's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather rather than a life-or-death situation. "We need to see your tactical data immediately." 8. They moved to the conference room, where Lithana had prepared a full display of everything they knew about the approaching swarm. As she began her presentation, Vex-High watched the human reactions carefully. Lieutenant Hayes studied the tactical information with cold professionalism. She asked detailed questions about swarm movement patterns, unit types, and resource requirements. Her knowledge of military matters was impressive and terrifying. Engineer Rodriguez examined the technical specifications of Dracari machines. He made notes on a small device and occasionally nodded as if he understood things that the Zilani had found impossible to comprehend. Sergeant Park watched the displays with the focused attention of a hunter studying prey. Her questions were about terrain, defensive positions, and civilian populations, but Captain Morrison's reaction was the most unsettling. He listened to everything with calm attention, showing no fear or concern. When Lithana finished explaining how the swarm had destroyed 17 worlds, leaving nothing but dead rock behind, Morrison simply nodded. "Standard swarm tactics," Lieutenant Hayes commented. "We've encountered similar forces before." The casual way she said this made every Zilani in the room go silent. Humans had faced something like the Dracari swarm before and survived. "You have fought against machine swarms?" Vex-High asked. "3 times in the past 50 years, Morrison replied. "Different designs, same basic concept. Self-replicating machines that consume everything in their path. The key is understanding what they want and how they operate." "What do they want?" Lithana asked. "Resources," Sergeant Park answered. "Raw materials to build more of themselves, metal, minerals, organic compounds. Anything useful gets absorbed into the swarm." Morrison stood and walked to the tactical display. "The problem with your situation is that you have too many resources and no way to defend them. The swarm will see your world as a perfect target. But surely we can fight them," Vex-High said hopefully. "With your help, with your weapons and knowledge." Humans exchanged glances. Morrison's expression became more serious. "Commander, how many military vessels do you have?" "Military vessels?" Vex-High looked confused. "We do not have military vessels. We are a peaceful people." "Ground forces, then?" "Armies, militias, anything." "We have no armies. We have not fought a war in over 1,000 years." The silence that followed was profound. Vexhai could see something in the humans' faces that looked almost like pity. Sir, Sergeant Park said to Morrison, they're completely defenseless. Morrison rubbed his forehead with one hand. Commander Vexhai, I need to be direct with you. Fighting the swarm with conventional tactics would require a massive military force. We brought 12 ships. The swarm has 50,000 units. In a straight fight, we would lose badly. Vexhai felt his hope crumbling. Then you cannot help us. I didn't say that, Morrison replied quickly. But saving your people and saving your world are two different things. We can help you save your people. Saving your world. That's more complicated. What do you mean? Lithana asked. Lieutenant Hayes answered. The swarm wants resources. If there are no resources to take, they move on to easier targets. You mean destroy our world ourselves? Vexhai was horrified. Destroy our cities, our art, our history? History won't matter if everyone is dead, Morrison said gently but firmly. We can evacuate your population to safe locations, can deny the swarm the resources they want, and we can make sure your people survive to rebuild somewhere else. But this is our home, Vexhai protested. These are the cities our ancestors built, the crystal gardens that took centuries to grow, the art galleries and healing centers and schools where our children learn. Engineer Rodriguez spoke up. Commander, I understand what you're feeling, but buildings can be rebuilt. Art can be created again. Children can learn anywhere. Dead people can't do any of those things. The humans waited patiently while the Zilani absorbed this information. Finally, Vexhai asked the question that everyone was thinking. If we agree to this plan, what happens to us afterward? Do we become your prisoners, your slaves? Morrison looked genuinely surprised by the question. What? No, of course not. Once the threat is over, you're free to go wherever you want. Rebuild your world, find a new one, whatever you choose. But why would you help us if you gain nothing from it? Lithana asked suspiciously. The question seemed to puzzle all four humans. They looked at each other as if they couldn't understand why anyone would ask such a thing. Because you asked for help, Sergeant Park said simply. Because it's the right thing to do, Lieutenant Hayes added. Because everyone deserves a chance to survive, Engineer Rodriguez said. Captain Morrison nodded, because we know what it's like to face impossible odds and have no one to turn to. We know what it's like to lose everything and keep fighting anyway. He paused and looked directly at Vexhai. Commander, I won't lie to you. This plan will be painful. You'll watch your world burn. You'll see everything you've built turn to ash. But your people will live. Your children will grow up. Your culture will continue. And if we refuse? Vexhai asked. Morrison's answer was simple and final. Then in 4 months, you'll all be dead, and your world will be stripped bare anyway. At least this way, something survives. Vexhai looked around the room at his advisors. He saw fear in their faces, but also a growing understanding. The humans were offering them a terrible choice, but it was better than no choice at all. How long do we have to decide? He asked. The evacuation ships need to launch within 2 weeks if we're going to get everyone to safety, Morrison replied. After that, we start the denial operations. Vexy nodded slowly. We'll discuss this with the Council. But Captain Morrison, I need to ask you something. What? Why should we trust you? The galaxy fears humans. They say you are conquerors and destroyers. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. Commander, we are what our world made us. Earth tried to kill us every day for millions of years. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the bacteria wanted us dead. We learned to be hard because we had to be hard to survive. He looked out the window at the peaceful Zilani world below, but we also learned something else. We learned that life is precious because it's so fragile. The Zilani Council met for 3 straight days. Voices were raised in the Great Chamber as representatives from every city and settlement argued about the human proposal. Some wanted to accept the plan immediately. Others insisted they should fight to defend their world. A few suggested they should surrender to the swarm and hope for mercy. Vexhai listened to all of them. What? But he already knew what the decision would be. When Council Elder Zephyrim stood to speak, his words carried the weight of centuries. "We have lived in peace for 1,000 years," the old Zilani said. "Our ancestors built this world with love and patience. How can we destroy in days what took generations to create? Because the alternative is the death of our entire species," Vexai replied firmly. "The humans offer us survival. That is more than anyone else has given us." The final vote was close, but it passed. The Zilani would accept the human plan. Within hours of the decision, human ships began arriving from all directions. The 12 warships were joined by massive transport vessels, mobile habitats, and construction units. The humans worked with efficiency that amazed and frightened the Zelania. Captain Morrison established his command center in the main orbital station. Vexai watched as human officers moved through the corridors, turning the peaceful research facility into a military headquarters. Weapon scans, security checkpoints, and combat-ready positions appeared overnight. "Your people work very fast," Vexai commented to Morrison as they stood in the new tactical center. "We have to," Morrison replied, without looking up from his displays. "Every day we waste is a day closer to the swarm's arrival." Lieutenant Hayes: "What's the status on civilian evacuation?" 70% complete, sir," Hayes reported from her station. "The mobile habitats are positioned in the asteroid belt. Food production units are online. The population can be sustained for 8 months if necessary." Vexai found the human efficiency both impressive and disturbing. In just 2 weeks, they had moved millions of Zilani to safety with almost no confusion or delay. But watching his people leave their homes was heartbreaking. He had visited one of the evacuation centers the day before. Families packed small bags with their most precious belongings. Children cried as they left their toys behind. Artists carefully wrapped their best works, knowing they might never see their studios again. A young Zilani girl named Kthra had approached him at the center. She was perhaps 10 years old by human standards, with the typical blue skin and large eyes of her people. "Commander Vexai," she had said in her small voice, "the humans say we have to leave our homes. But why can't we just ask the machines to go away?" Vexai had knelt down to look her in the eyes. "Because some things cannot be reasoned with, little one. Sometimes the only choice is to run or fight. Then why don't we fight?" The question had no good answer. How could he explain to a child that her people had never learned how to fight? That they had built a civilization based on peace and healing, not violence and war? Now, watching the humans prepare for battle, Vexai was beginning to understand the difference between his people and theirs. The humans saw everything as a potential threat or weapon. When Engineer Rodriguez toured the Crystal Gardens, his first question was whether the crystals could conduct electricity for defensive barriers. When Sergeant Park examined the cities, she immediately identified choke points where enemies could be ambushed. Commander Lathana called from her station. "Engineer Rodriguez wants to meet with our geological team." "What for?" Vexai asked. "He says he needs to know where all the mineral deposits are located." Vexai found Rodriguez in the geology lab, studying detailed maps of Kthra's underground resources. The human engineer's mechanical arm attachments moved over the displays, marking locations with frightening precision. "Engineer Rodriguez, what are you planning?" Rodriguez looked up with a grin that showed his teeth, like all human expressions. Involving teeth, it made Vexai nervous. "Commander, we're going to make your planet worthless to the swarm. Every major mineral deposit, every ore vein, every underground resource they might want, you plan to destroy all of it. Not destroy, contaminate, poison. Make it so dangerous to extract that the swarm will decide it's not worth the effort." Rodriguez turned back to his maps. "Nuclear charges in the deep mines will create radiation zones. Chemical weapons will turn the soil toxic. Biological agents will make the water undrinkable." A Zilani geologist named Morton stepped forward. He was young and had always been fascinated by human technology. "Engineer Rodriguez, could you teach us how these weapons work?" Rodriguez paused in his work. "You want to learn about weapons?" "We want to understand how to defend ourselves," Mortan said firmly. "If more threats come in the future, we should be prepared." For the first time since arriving, Rodriguez looked surprised. "I thought your people were pacifists." We were, Morton replied. But we are learning that the galaxy is not a peaceful place. If we want to survive, we must change. Over the following days, something unexpected began happening. Despite their fear of humans, some Zilani started working closely with them. Lithana joined Lieutenant Hayes in the tactical center, learning to read sensor data and identify threats. Mortan followed Rodriguez everywhere, asking endless questions about engineering and weapons. Even some of the medical staff began studying human combat medicine. The humans seemed surprised by this cooperation. Sergeant Park commented to Morrison that most species either worshipped humans as gods or feared them as demons. The Zilani were doing neither. They were learning from them. It's like they're adapting, Park observed. Changing themselves, too. Meet the threat. Morrison nodded. Maybe that's why they survived on their world for so long. They're more flexible than they appear. But not all Zilani supported the changes. Elder Zephyrim led a group that opposed what they called the corruption of our peaceful nature. They held protests in the evacuation centers, arguing that it was better to die as they were than to live as something else. The conflict came to a head. During a heated meeting in the command center, Zephyrim confronted Vexai directly. Elk, what you have done to us, the elder said angrily. Our children are learning to make weapons. Our scientists study death instead of life. Our artists create nothing because their studios have been destroyed. This is not survival. This is the end of who we are. Vexai was tired from weeks of stress and difficult decisions. And what would you have us do, Elder? Sit quietly while the swarm strips our world bare? Die with dignity while our children are consumed by machines? Yes, Zephyrim shouted. Better to die as Zilani than to live as something else. The argument was interrupted by alarms throughout the station. Lieutenant Hayes called out from her position. Long-range sensors are detecting movement at the edge of the system. The swarm is early. Morrison was at the tactical display instantly. How early? 3 weeks ahead of schedule, sir. First scouts will arrive in 5 days. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as humans and Zilani worked together to confirm the readings. The news was bad. Not only was the swarm arriving early, but it was larger than expected. Instead of 50,000 units, sensors detected over 60,000 machines moving toward Kthra. Morrison's voice cut through the noise. All stations implement emergency protocols. Begin immediate destruction of remaining surface installations. All evacuation ships launch within 12 hours. Sir Hayes said quietly, the contamination charges aren't ready. We need at least another week to position them properly. Then we'll have to make do with what we have. Morrison turned to Vexai. Commander, this is it. Once we start the destruction sequence, there's no going back. Are your people ready? Vexai looked around the command center. He saw Zilani and humans working side by side, preparing for a battle that would decide the fate of an entire world. His people had changed in just a few weeks. They were no longer the purely peaceful species they had been. They were something new, something that could survive in a dangerous galaxy. Even Elder Zephyrim stood silent, understanding that the time for debate had passed. We're ready, Vex, I said. Morrison nodded and activated the fleet communication system. All ships, this is Morrison. Execute Operation Scorched Earth. Burn it all. Across Kthra, nuclear charges began detonating. The beautiful crystal gardens that had grown for centuries vanished in blinding flashes of light. Cities that had stood for millennia crumbled into radioactive ruins. Forests were reduced to ash. Lakes and rivers became poisoned wastelands. From the orbital stations, Vexai watched his world die. Each explosion felt like a knife in his heart. Everything his ancestors had built, everything his people had loved, was being destroyed by the very beings who had come to save them. Beside him, young Kthra pressed her face against the observation window. She had refused to go to the evacuation ships, insisting that she wanted to stay and help.
Ow!
Now she watched her home planet burn. Commander Vexai, she said in her small voice, will we ever be able to go home? Vexai put his hand on her shoulder. Someday, little one. But when we do, it will be a different home. And we will be different people. Different how? Thought about how to answer? People had learned to destroy in order to save. They had learned that sometimes violence was necessary to protect peace. The Drakari swarm arrived like a dark cloud, blotting out the stars. 60,000 mechanical units dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their metal hulls gleaming in the light of Kthra's sun. From the command center, Vexai watched. The enemy fleet spread across the system with terrifying efficiency. "They're bigger than we expected," Lieutenant Hayes reported, studying her tactical displays. "Some of those constructor units are the size of small moons." Captain Morrison stood at the center of the command room, his face calm despite the overwhelming odds. Estimated time until they reached Kthra. 6 hours, sir, Engineer Rodriguez answered from his station. "They're moving slower than usual, probably scanning for threats." "Good, that gives us time to get into position." Morrison activated the fleet communication system. "All ships, implement dispersal pattern 7. Hey, wait for my signal before engaging." Vexai watched as the 12 human warships spread out across the system, disappearing into asteroid fields and behind moons. They looked impossibly small compared to the approaching swarm. "Captain Morrison," Vexai said quietly, "your ships are outnumbered 5,000 to 1. How can you possibly fight them all?" Morrison turned to him with that strange human expression that showed teeth. "Commander, we're not here to fight them all. We're here to make them wish they had never come." The first Drakari scouts reached Kthra 3 hours later. The mechanical units were sleek and fast, designed for reconnaissance and initial resource assessment. They began scanning the planet's surface immediately. From his position in the command center, Vexai could see the scouts' reaction to what they found. Instead of a rich, living world full of resources, they discovered a poisoned wasteland. Radiation readings were off the charts. The atmosphere was filled with toxic chemicals. The oceans were contaminated with biological weapons that would destroy any machinery that tried to extract minerals from them. "The scouts are transmitting data back to the main fleet," Lathana reported. She had learned to read the human tactical displays with surprising skill. "The swarm is slowing down." Confused, Sergeant Park observed. "This doesn't match their expected resource profile." For a moment, Vexai felt hope. Maybe the swarm would decide Kthra wasn't worth the effort. Maybe they would move on to easier targets. Then the main fleet began to move again, but this time with a different approach. Instead of preparing for a simple resource extraction, the Drakari began deploying heavy mining equipment designed to dig deep beneath the planet's contaminated surface. "They're adapting," Morrison said grimly. "Psst. If the surface is poisoned, they'll go deeper." The battle began when the first Drakari mining ships entered Kthra's atmosphere. They never saw the attack coming. Hidden weapons platforms, camouflaged by radiation and debris, opened fire from concealed positions across the planet's surface. Nuclear missiles streaked up from the poisoned ground, striking the massive mining vessels with devastating effect. The explosions lit up the sky like a second sunrise. 3 mining ships were destroyed instantly. More were badly damaged and began falling toward the surface in burning spirals. "First blood to us, Sergeant," Park reported with satisfaction. But the swarm's response was swift and brutal. Drakari fighter units swarmed toward the planet, searching for the hidden weapon platforms. Their scanners probed every crater and ruin, looking for signs of human activity. Morrison had expected this. Rodriguez, activate the decoys. Across Kthra's surface, false energy signatures began broadcasting from empty ruins. The Drakari fighters attacked phantom targets while the real weapon platforms remained hidden. For every real position they found and destroyed, they wasted ammunition on 10 fake ones. The space battle began when Drakari ships moved to secure the orbital area around Kthra. They didn't expect to find human warships hiding in the planet's ring system. The UES Vengeance emerged from behind a massive asteroid, its weapons already firing. The human dreadnought's guns tore through a Drakari cruiser before it could react. Other human ships appeared throughout the system, striking fast and then disappearing back into cover. "Hit-and-run tactics," Morrison explained to Vexai as they watched the battle unfold. "We can't stand and fight, so we don't. We hit them where they're weak, then vanish before they can hit back. The strategy worked for several days. Human ships would appear, destroy one or two Dracari vessels, then disappear into asteroid fields or behind moons. The swarm's superior. Numbers meant nothing if they couldn't bring their weapons to bear on targets they couldn't find. But the Dracari were learning too. They began sending larger patrols to hunt for human ships. They deployed sensor networks throughout the system. They started using area effect weapons to clear entire asteroid fields where human ships might be hiding. Slowly, the balance began to shift. Human losses mounted as the swarm adapted to their tactics. The U.S. Striker was destroyed while attempting to ambush a Dracari patrol. The U's Guardian suffered critical damage and had to withdraw from the battle. We're losing ships faster than we can afford, Lieutenant Hayes reported during a brief tactical meeting. At this rate, we'll be down to half strength within a week. Morrison studied the tactical displays with the focused intensity that Vexai had learned to recognize. When the human captain made that expression, he was planning something dangerous. Engineer Rodriguez said carefully, "You're thinking about the Omega Protocol, aren't you?" "It may be our only option," Morrison replied. "The swarm is too large and too adaptable. Conventional tactics aren't going to work." Vexai didn't understand what they were discussing, but he could see the worry in the humans' faces. "What is the Omega Protocol?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "It's a final option, Commander. Something we use when there's no other way to win." "What does it involve?" "Sacrifice, Sergeant." Park answered simply. Before Vexai could ask more questions, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. Lathana called out from her station, "Commander, the swarm is changing tactics. They're sending the majority of their forces towards something on the planet's surface." The main display showed the movement of Dracari units, instead of spreading out across Kthra to extract resources. They were converging on a single location beneath the planet's largest ocean. "What's at that location?" Morrison asked. Rodriguez checked his geological surveys. "According to our scans, it's the largest deposit of rare earth elements on the planet. The kind of materials they use for hyperspace drives and advanced computing systems. They must have detected it through the contamination," Hayes observed. "If they can extract those elements, they can build faster ships and better computers." Morrison stared at the display for several seconds. Then his expression changed, and Vexai saw something in the human's eyes that looked almost like satisfaction. "Rodriguez, how much of our nuclear material do we have left?" "About 60%, sir. We've been saving it for emergency use." "This is an emergency." Morrison turned to the communication officer. "Signal the fleet. All ships are to converge on grid, reference 7 Alpha. Full speed." Sir Hayes said carefully, "That's directly above the Dracari concentration. We'll be flying into the middle of their entire fleet." "I know," Morrison replied. "Rodriguez, I need you to prepare something special. Every nuclear weapon we have left combined into a single device. Make it as big as you can." Rodriguez's face went pale. "Sir? A device that size? The explosion would be visible from orbit. The radiation would contaminate half the planet." "The planet's already contaminated," Morrison pointed out. "But this will make it permanently worthless to the swarm." Vexai began to understand what Morrison was planning. "Captain, you intend to destroy the entire mineral deposit." "More than that," Morrison said grimly. "I intend to destroy everything. Within 100 kilometers of it, the swarm, the deposit, and anything else in the area, including your ships." Morrison's silence was answer enough. Young Kthra had been listening from her position near the communication console. She had refused to leave the command center, insisting that she wanted to help however she could. Now she looked up at Morrison with her large, innocent eyes. "Captain Morrison, if you do this, will you die?" Morrison knelt down to her level, just as he had done before. "Maybe, little one. But sometimes people have to take risks to protect others, like my parents did when they stayed behind to help with the evacuation." Morrison's expression softened. Vexai realized that Kthra's parents had been among the volunteers who remained on the planet's surface to operate the hidden weapon platforms. They had died 3 days ago when a Dracari patrol found their position. "Yes," Morrison said gently. "Just like that." Over the next 18 hours, the human fleet moved into position above the swarm concentration. Rodriguez worked frantically to combine their remaining nuclear weapons into a single, massive device. The other ships took defensive positions around the Vengeance, preparing for what everyone knew would be their final battle. As the human ships approached the swarm, Drakara units began converging on their position. Thousands of enemy fighters rose from the planet's surface. Massive battleships moved to intercept the human fleet. "They know we're coming," Hayes reported. "The entire swarm is moving to stop us." 6 months after the battle, Kthra looked like a world recovering from a terrible fever. The radioactive fires had burned out, leaving behind scarred landscapes that glowed softly in the darkness. The poisoned atmosphere was slowly clearing. As automated systems worked to neutralize the toxins, where the great ocean had been, a massive crater stretched for hundreds of kilometers, its edges still warm from the fusion blast that had ended the war. Vexai stood on the observation deck of the new orbital station, watching the first group of Zilani colonists return to the planet's surface. They wore protective suits and carried detection equipment, but they were going home. It was a different home than the one they had left. But it was still theirs. The surviving humans had worked alongside the Zilani to make this moment possible. After Captain Morrison's sacrifice, command of the human forces had fallen to Chief Petty Officer Alex Chen from the destroyed ship U.S. Thunder. Chen was younger than Morrison and less experienced, but he carried the same determination to help the Zilani rebuild. "Commander Vexai," Chen said as he joined him at the observation window. "The first settlement domes are ready for installation. My engineers think the radiation levels in Sector 7 are low enough for permanent habitation." Vexai nodded, still watching the shuttles descend toward the planet's surface. "Chief Chen, I have been thinking about something Captain Morrison said before the battle. Told us that we would be different people when we returned home." "He was right," Chen replied. "Are you different?" Vexai considered the question. 6 months ago, he had been the commander of a peaceful research station. Now he found himself leading the reconstruction of an entire civilization. He had learned to read tactical displays, coordinate military operations, and make decisions that affected millions of lives. His people looked to him not just for guidance, but for protection. "Yes," he said finally, "we are all different." Changes were visible everywhere. Young Zilani, like Morton, worked alongside human engineers, learning to build structures that could withstand both natural disasters and potential attacks. Lithana had established a new scientific institute that studied both healing and defense technologies. Even the children were different. They played games that involved strategy and teamwork rather than just artistic expression. But perhaps the most significant change was in little Kthra. The girl who had once asked why they couldn't simply talk to the machines now spent her days learning human languages and studying their history. She wanted to understand the people who had saved her world, even at the cost of their own lives. "Commander," Kthra said as she approached them on the observation deck, "the memorial is almost finished. Would you like to see it?" They took a shuttle down to the planet's surface, landing near the edge of the great crater. The memorial stood on a hill overlooking the place where Captain Morrison and his crew had made their final sacrifice. It was built from crystal grown in the radioactive soil, shaped by both Zilani artistry and human engineering principles. The memorial was not just beautiful, it was functional. The crystal structure collected and purified radiation from the surrounding area, slowly healing the land while creating something magnificent to behold. It was the perfect symbol of what both species had become: practical beauty. Functional art, strength, combined with grace. At the base of the memorial, names were carved in both Zilani and human writing. Jake Morrison, Kelly Hayes, Danny Rodriguez, Lisa Park, and dozens of others who had died to save a people they barely knew. Below the names, a simple message appeared in multiple languages. "They heard us cry for help. They came anyway. The humans could have ignored our call," Kthra said as they stood before the memorial. "They could have conquered us after saving us. Instead, they chose to protect us. That makes them heroes." Chen was quiet as he read the names of his fallen comrades. Finally, he spoke. "Captain Morrison always said that strength without compassion was just brutality. You can be the toughest species in the galaxy, But if you don't use that strength to help others, you're no better than the machines that tried to destroy you. More shuttles landed nearby, carrying Zalani families returning to rebuild their homes. Vexai watched children run across the scarred landscape, playing among the crystal formations that had grown in the radioactive soil. They laughed and shouted with joy, just as children had always done. Some things never changed, no matter how much the world around them was transformed. An elderly Zalani woman approached the memorial, carrying a small bundle of native flowers that had been genetically modified to thrive in the new environment. She placed them at the base of the crystal structure and whispered something in the old language before walking away. "What did she say?" Chen asked. Vexai translated. She said, "Thank you for letting our children see tomorrow." Over the following weeks, more Zalani returned to the surface. They established new settlements in areas where the radiation had dropped to safe levels. They planted crops engineered to grow in the altered soil. They built schools where children learned both traditional Zalani arts and practical human skills. The new cities looked different from the old ones. They included defensive walls, emergency shelters, and communication networks that could function, even under attack. The Zalani had learned from their human teachers that peace was worth fighting for, but only if you were prepared to defend it. Elder Zephyrim, who had once opposed any cooperation with humans, now worked closely with Chief Chen to establish new government systems. The old council structure remained, but it was supplemented by departments of defense, emergency management, and interstellar relations. "I was wrong," Zephyrim admitted to Vexai during one of their planning sessions. "I thought that changing meant losing who we were. But we have not lost our essential nature. We still value art, healing, and harmony. We have simply learned that sometimes those values require protection." The transformation was not limited to the Zalani. The surviving humans had also changed. During their time on Kthra, Chief Chen spent his free time learning Zalani artistic techniques. His engineers incorporated Zalani design principles into their construction projects, creating buildings that were both defensible and beautiful. The most ambitious project was the construction of a new orbital shipyard, where humans and Zalani worked together to build vessels that combined the best of both technologies. Human armor and weapon systems were integrated with Zalani healing and life support technologies. The result was ships that could fight when necessary, but were primarily designed for exploration and rescue operations. "We call it the Unity class," Chen explained to Vexai as they toured the shipyard. "It's fast enough to respond to distress calls, tough enough to defend civilians, and comfortable enough for long-term missions." The first ship of the new class was launched exactly 1 year after the battle. The ceremony was attended by representatives from dozens of species who had come to see what humans and Zalani had built together. The ship was named the UES-ZKS Harmony, and its mission was simple: to answer distress calls from anyone who needed help. Captain Sarah Brooks, one of the surviving human officers, stood at the ship's bridge alongside Commander Veltar, a young Zalani who had trained in both human and Zalani command techniques. Together, they represented something new in the galaxy, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose. As the Harmony prepared for its first mission, Vexai received a message that made him smile. It was a distress call from a species called the Mentari, whose world was threatened by solar flares. They needed help evacuating their population to safety. "Well, Commander," Chen said as they listened to the message, "looks like someone else needs heroes." Vexai thought about how much had changed since his people had sent out their own desperate plea for help. They had been saved by the most unlikely heroes imaginable, and in the process, they had become heroes themselves. "Then we should answer their call," he said. The Harmony launched that same day, carrying a mixed crew of humans and Zalani toward the Mentari system. As the ship disappeared into hyperspace, Kthra stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching it go. She was no longer the frightened child who had asked why they couldn't simply talk to the machines. She was training to be a communications officer, learning to speak the languages of dozens of species so that she could help coordinate rescue operations across the galaxy. "Commander Vexai," she said as they watched the stars, "do you think Captain Morrison would?" "Be proud of what we've become," Vexai smiled. The question reminded him of something Morrison had said during their first meeting, that the strongest people were not those who hurt others, but those who helped them. I think he would be very proud, Vexai replied. We learned the most important. A lesson he had to teach us. What lesson? That when someone cries for help, you answer, no matter how dangerous it might be, no matter what it might cost. You answer because that's what makes you strong. Below them, Kthra continued its slow healing. The radioactive scars were fading. New forests grew in the poisoned soil. Cities rose from the ashes of the old world, built to last and defended by people who had learned that peace required both compassion and strength.